Hello, REMIC leaders. In this video, I'll be describing the oral defense of the PDSA, which is your summative assessment for Unit 3. So through the course of this semester, we've been moving through the improvement science process, beginning with identifying a problem and understanding that problem within a larger system, and specifically the root causes of that problem, and then conducting research and developing a theory of action that you can implement in order to reach an aim which would address this particular problem. And then once that theory was established, you chose a change idea and engaged in PDSA cycles of that change idea. So the purpose of this assessment is for you to be able to articulate that work and draw a connection between your problem, the causes you identified, the research you did, and the theory of action you developed, and then to be able to describe which change idea you chose and how you implemented the cycles and what you learned from the data that you collected in those cycles. And then to be able to articulate what your key learnings are from this entire experience so far and how those learnings are going to inform your future action with your improvement work for the rest of the school year. And the way in which we're going to do this is you're going to present on Zoom to your primary instructor and one other instructor that is not familiar with your project. And the reason why we do it in this way is because this is your first at bat for the REMIC Leadership Conference. Because not only is it important that through this course, you're learning how to engage in improvement science, but also that you're learning how to communicate about the change that you're leading. And so at this point in the process, you're going to be communicating to us the change that you've led so far, and then how that's going to inspire your future action within this course and within the improvement work in your school. So you're going to prepare a presentation using PowerPoint, Google Slides, or another slideware application. That presentation is going to encompass all the components of the rubric, which we'll go through in detail during this presentation. And you're going to, as I said, present to two of us on Zoom. Your presentation is going to be 10 minutes in length, and then it's going to be followed by a period of questions and feedback. Through this process, you're also going to be practicing best practices for presentations and for slide design and the way in which you're presenting, which we'll talk about in a bit. So here's how the time breaks down. There's going to be 10 minutes for your presentation, so it is going to be really important that you're succinct, and that's, as you know, for your final presentation, it's timed as well, and so you need to be able to, at that point, when you have an even more to communicate, you need to be able to be succinct as well. So we're starting to practice that right now. Then the faculty members are going to ask you questions, and the faculty members are also going to provide you with feedback about what they heard. And then you're going to be able to reflect on that feedback. And then there's just 2 minutes at the end for closure. This is a large assessment. And so we recommend that you chunk this work and that you don't wait until a day or two before your oral defense to prepare the presentation and then deliver it. But we recommend that you prepare this presentation in chunks and that you get feedback from others along the way. And we will make ourselves available for that feedback. So there is a recommendation within the rubric and also in Lead with Zeal, which describes how you can break this into smaller chunks so that you're not waiting until the end, and also so that you can have time to get feedback and make adjustments, because you will need to make several rounds of adjustments and hear from other people what they understood from your presentation, rather than just do that for the first time during your oral defense. So you can look at these dates, but basically we have built it out over the 4 weeks of this unit that you can work on section 1 of your presentation, and then section 2, and then section 3. We recommend at that point that you pair up with another leader of your choice and that you plan a Zoom call and present to each other and give each other feedback using the probing questions in the rubric that are available to you. And then we recommend that you finish your slide deck, and that by Sunday, November 21st, you record yourself on Torch presenting, and you share that with your primary instructor, and then your primary instructor will commit to getting you feedback on that presentation. That, if you choose that option of recording yourself, that must be done before November 21st, so that we have the time to give you the feedback before the oral defenses begin. So let's talk about the most important part of this presentation, which is ensuring that there's a logical progression and that you are able to explain how your problem connects with the causes, connects with the theory of action, connects with your change idea, etc. So let's start with that first section that you'll be developing, which is your problem and root causes. That aligns with this section of the probing questions which are available to you. So we want to know, is the problem well evidenced, and what are the sources of data that you used to validate your problem, and why is it urgent in your school? We want to know very briefly why there is a gap between your current reality and your mission. So how does this represent that mission gap? And then we want to know about your causal analysis. We want to know what your root causes are, and we want to understand that they are at the heart of the problem, and we want to know what data you use to identify those root causes. So you need to create some slides that bring us through that progression of understanding your problem, the gap with the mission, and the causal analysis. You want to look at the rubric and see that we are looking for a concise statement of the problem. We are looking for a comprehensive set of root causes, but the keyword there is root causes. You don't need to explain every single cause, but you really need to identify which of those are the root causes. We want to know about the evidence of your problem. What is the data that pointed towards this problem or that you needed to collect to validate this problem? And we want to know about how this represents a gap between your mission and the current reality. So here's some examples. Also, I have this slide in here to just remind you that you're going to need to give a very, very brief context to begin your presentation. And that means we want to know what school you work at, where it is, what position you are, and maybe some other information, which is really essential to understanding your problem. But you're going to be tight on time, and you don't need to spend a lot of time on this. You only need to give us the information that we need to know in order to understand the rest of the story that you're going to tell us. So in this case, this is Kyle Kubik's from several years ago, but his project was on behavior and inconsistencies with behavior. So he needed to tell us that this was a new school, that there were a lot of students and a lot of staff members and several administrators, and that kind of explained all these disconnects. And then also that there were 3 sites. So there was a need for cohesion here. And that was the main point of his slide and the context that he gave, as well as his position as principal of one of those buildings. Then you're going to need to be able to describe your problem. And you want to be able to do this in a simple way. So here's an example where the problem had to do with achievement. I'm not sure if it was reading or math, but that was certainly articulated as this leader talked about this slide and made the point that that those students that were at the 62nd national percentile, and that the goal was 80%, which was why she had that pyramid here for tier 1. And that it was also problematic that the growth percentile was under the archdiocesan average. So those were like the key points that she made, and this slide helps us to understand those key points about the problem. This is another example of a slide of how someone described the causes. So here you don't see their fishbone, which is not going to be pretty to look at, right? Instead, you see that they sort of simplified the fishbone into the major categories that were causing the low performance and little growth, and that they highlighted the 3 that were determined to be the root causes and that were going to be addressed through the theory of action. And naturally, the leader was sharing other information that is not on this slide. And that's really important to know. You don't need to put all of your information on the slide. We're listening to you, and we're listening to the information that you give us. And this slide is supporting that, and should be simple enough that we're not distracted reading the slide while we're trying to listen to your explanation of these particular causes and the evidence you have for these causes. Once you develop that section, you're going to move on to your working theory of improvement. And here we're wanting to know, okay, so now we know your problem. We know the gap that exists between the mission and the reality right now. We know the root causes that are causing this problem. And so now what? What is the theory that you developed based on your understanding of the problem, based on your understanding of these root causes? What are the drivers that you determined would impact these causes? And are they rooted in research? So what's the research that inspired this theory? And then are they within your purview to enact and feasible within the given time frame? So, how is this a reasonable theory of action for this particular school year? and for the role which you fill. And then we're going to look at the rubric for that section of the presentation. So here we're looking that your theory of improvement is detailed. We want to know what the aim is and that it's measurable. We want to see at least 2 drivers that you've identified and associated change ideas. And we want to see that those drivers are aligned to the causal analysis and also that they are driven by relevant and high quality information and research. So you've done this work. You've done this work through the driver diagram that you've developed in your improvement folder. You've done this work through your strategy search narrative. So now it's putting it into a presentation so that it's easily understandable. And we can see this progression from problem to root causes to drivers and how research impacts those drivers. So here's an example. This is Douglas Hosking's driver diagram. So he was looking to improve reading scores, and he had 3 basic drivers: quality instruction, intervention structures, and culture for learning literacy. But this isn't what he showed on his slide. Instead, this is what he showed. He showed 2 of his drivers that he focused on within his project, and he just simplified that graphic so that we knew that his 2 drivers that he focused on were building a culture where we are literally focused RIDAs and improving the quality of middle school literacy instruction. Those are the 2 drivers. And then he talked about his aim in also a really graphically pleasing way and easily understandable. So he showed how he set goals of growth for different grade levels in this way. And then he went through and described each driver. And he, as you can see there, he described the research which supported that particular driver. So Christopher Emdin in that example was talking about the specifics of how teachers see themselves like they see students, they see the best in students, and how he could build this culture of teachers inspired by that research and the specific change ideas related to that driver of faculty seminars, home visits, and teacher-student book talks. And then similarly, driver 2, he described Fisher and Frey and Think Alouds and how that inspired driver 2 in this work. And then he described the change ideas or the secondary drivers that connected with that driver of faculty collaboration, instructional coaching, and teacher peer observation. So what we want you to notice here is how it's simplified. He naturally gave more narrative and explanation than I did about what each of these secondary drivers or change ideas are. But the point is that he related it to research and that he really simplified it so that the audience can focus on what he's saying and explaining rather than the slide in front of them. So once you describe your working theory, we're moving on to the change idea that you chose and how you measured it. So here you're going to be describing your PDSA cycle. In this section, we want to make sure that you provide a justification for the change idea that you chose. Again, you already articulated this within your strategy search. And then we want to understand how you measured this change idea. What data did you collect? What did your data collection tool look like? And what were you trying to answer with the data you collected during the rounds? And then understand that will capture enough data to be able to really improve these cycles of improvement. So now our logical progression goes from problem to root causes to drivers to one of the change ideas connected to that driver to the data that was collected during implementation of the PDSA cycles. So here's a few examples. It was a bit more limited in access to the PDSA slides because we didn't collect them last year. But I did find a few that are helpful and certainly simple to look at and graphically sort of pleasing. This is from Beth Waltrix last year, and she was doing a cycle on social, on her Facebook posts and social networking, and she was focused on how she could give windows in to the learning, considering all of the barriers that COVID presented last year with parent engagement. And so she was taking videos in classrooms and testing different ways in which she could leverage social media to give a window into parents. And so here you see, as she was explaining this was her first cycle. This was one of the first posts she did. She talked about the likes and how many of those likes were parents. And so a parent engagement rate, which was directly the measures that she was collecting that were directly related to her PDSA cycles. And then she talked about the next 2 cycles and adjustments that she made based on the data. that were related to varying the grade level and posting events on the same day to see if engagement increased related to that. Also, you're going to have the ability to watch Carrie Ann's oral defense. She's given us permission to share that with you, and she did a really nice job. So here's some screenshots from her presentation, and you can see that she used graphs to show us the change after 4 cycles of data. And she had students take a survey each week on their organization, and she was implementing specific changes related to executive functioning skills. And you can see that she had a really significant improvement by the end of cycle 4. So she used a pie chart here in order to show that. She also created a bar graph, and that shows the change in missing work through the 4 cycles. So you had some chances to try creating charts and graphs this summer in Executive Management 2. If you're rusty on that, you can certainly talk to others in your school that might be able to help you. You can talk to your primary instructor. You can use YouTube to remind yourself how to create charts and graphs. It's not a requirement of this assessment, but if it would support the data that you collected and analyzed, then it's going to be really helpful to include a chart or graph. So it really depends on what kind of data you're collecting. And if you're collecting quantitative data that would be really helpful to visualize within a chart or a graph, then we would really encourage you to create one for your presentation. If the data that you're collecting is more qualitative and it is observations and it is quotes and snippets of occurrences within the classrooms, then you can present those and you don't need to feel like you need to include a chart or a graph. And then don't forget the last section. So we want to make sure that you have time within your presentation to get to key learnings and next steps. So what did you learn from this process? What did you learn from the data you collected in your PDSA cycle? How is that going to impact how this project will continue? We want to think about extending this project. Are you going to be taking on another driver or more change ideas? How is that going to look? How are you going to adjust your approach based on what you learned? How are you going to lead others and get others involved in these change efforts? The other thing we want you to be mindful of is that final row on the rubric, which is slide design and presentation quality. So the slides need to include an appropriate amount of verbal and visual information. It should be strategically chosen to help the audience member understand the key points of the presentation, and you should be able to respond to questions confidently and thoughtfully. So here's a few examples. It doesn't need to be overly fancy. These are again from Carrie Ann's, but her key learnings, she bulleted them out and then she explained them very clearly through her presentation. And same thing with her next steps. We also shared with you Presentation Zen, which is a really awesome resource for understanding best practices in slide design. And so we really encourage you to read through that and then to consider that as you're designing your slides. And really what we're looking for is it for is to be simple and easy to digest as an audience member. And for those of us who are watching the presentation, what you choose to display on your slide should be strategic and should point us to what's important about what you're saying. So we don't want to be reading. So there should not be a lot of text. And you need to make sure that the graphics are accurate, and you need to make sure that you can draw connections for us through your narrative. So keep it simple, reduce your text, use images and data points to tell your story, but don't go overboard with sort of clip art and images and things like that. And just carefully select your charts and graphs to display your data. So we hope that this explanation and these examples have helped. We highly encourage you to chunk this out over several weeks and to take us up on offers to get feedback before your oral defense. And to utilize one another and leverage one another for practice opportunities before that defense. This is going to be a really great opportunity for you to be able to share all the work you've done and to get some great feedback from others, and that includes other leaders that you collaborate with through this process. So please don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to help you in these next 4 weeks to prepare for your defense and so that you're set up for success, not only through these PDSA cycles in the next 4 weeks, but as you continue this project into next semester.